Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Trump Watch, the show that keeps a watch on President Trump and reports to you some of the highlights of what Trump has been doing in the previous week. So let's jump right on in with one of Trump's wars that he is waging or has launched. He's got a lot of wars going on now. We know that there's the war on immigrants, there's the war on terrorism, there's the war on drugs, the wars, trade wars. But let's start with the war on Harvard University and other institutions of higher learning. Trump has told Harvard that if they don't comply with his edicts or orders with respect to how the university is being run, he's going to terminate the $8 billion of federal aid that goes to the university, or some amount, some percentage of that $8 billion. And of course, this comes on the heels of his war with Columbia University, where the same sort of threat was being made. I think the sum was $300 or $400 million, something like that. Well, naturally, the people on the left are saying, violation of independent universities, that they should have the autonomy to run their affairs and freedom of speech and so forth. But it's difficult for me to have much sympathy for Harvard. To be honest with you, when I read that they were receiving $8 billion, that's with a B, on an annual basis, I was stunned, absolutely stunned. I mean, here is a university that has an endowment of $53 billion. That's like $53 billion in the bank in savings. And that's money that people have donated, presumably. Why can't they use that $53 billion to help run their university? Because the taxpayers are over here underwriting our operations to the tune of $8 billion a year. I mean, there's a lot of people in this country that are struggling, especially young people, struggling with making ends meet. The IRS is taking so much of their income for the welfare state, including Social Security and Medicare and all the other welfare programs, the national security state, the Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA, the drug war, the war on immigrants. I mean, there's just massive amounts of income are being taken from people, not to mention the fact that the Federal Reserve piles on with debasement of the currency, cheapening the value of everybody's money is reflected by all the rising prices in grocery stores and car sales and so forth. And then to know that part of this money is going to these rich universities, it's just incredible. And it goes to show you, though, the old saying, he who pays the piper calls the tune. You go on the dole. Don't cry when the government is there controlling you. If you don't want to be controlled, don't go on the dole. What Harvard wants is, they say, we want to be on the dole. We want to continue the IRS plundering and looting people who are struggling in order to send part of the loot to us, but we don't want to be told what to do. Well, welcome to Real World 101, Harvard. You take money from the government, and the government's going to control you. So it really ought to raise the question in people's mind of the role of government in a free society. Why is this considered a legitimate role of government? Well, because education's important. Well, religion's important too. Some people would argue religion's more important than education. We don't have the federal government funding religion. And yet, there's plenty of churches that people go to. Poor people find their way into churches, and there's no federal aid helping those churches out. It's all voluntarily funded. But what you see, the way to think about this is that universities should be relying on voluntary support, tuitions or donations. And let's stick with donations. Well, this is where people are voluntarily supporting the university. So that the university is essentially saying, well, people aren't donating enough to us, so we need to turn to the state. Well, what they're really saying is, we want the state to take money from the people who are not donating to us, who don't want to donate to us. They have other reasons, other things they want to do with their money. And so the university says, this is wrong for people to make the decision not to send their money to us, so we're going to use the state to take their money from them and in the name of education. Well, this is pure nonsense. This is not the role of government. If somebody can't raise enough money, then they just need to cut their expenses. But the idea of using this system to really steal money from people through force, when they would rather use their money for something else, is just morally abominable. So the real solution to Harvard's woes here is not to be filing suit like they're filing suit now and so forth, and claiming that this is illegitimate what Trump is doing. Just get off the dole. And that means they are now totally independent of government control. The president, of course, is Hillsdale College. They're not under any government control. Government can't tell them what to do. Why? Because they're not on the dole. They choose consciously not to take the dole in order to remain independent. In fact, many years ago, the Fed said, here the Feds are controlling every university across the land, but it really irks them that there's one that they're not controlling. Really. So they get obsessed with this. And so they say, well, we have a right to, or we have the authority to control Hillsdale's admissions office because the students are taking government grants or government loans. It was a little tricky thing that they used. They knew that Hillsdale itself was not receiving any money. So it was their underhanded way to try to get control because they're so obsessed with the idea that there's one institution that is not under their control. So this was their underhanded way to get control. So the Supreme Court or the federal judiciary, I'm not sure which one, agreed. And so Hillsdale just said, okay, students can't take government loans or grants anymore. And they totally replaced all that money for those students. The students didn't go elsewhere. They just totally replaced it with voluntary donations from their donors. So they are totally independent. And you know darn well it irks the heck out of the Feds. I mean, irks them that there's a college here in the United States they can't control. But it shows you that that's the solution to this whole thing. And so maybe President Trump has done us a service here by going on the attack against these universities that are on the dole. And the solution to this is get off the dole, terminate the dole. Instead of Trump, threatening to do this if they don't do this and they don't do that, just terminate the dole entirely and have Harvard say, we don't want to take the dole anymore, and all the other universities across the land. And that includes the state dole. All right, so in any event, let's move on to tariffs. Okay, always in the news now. Big trade war that Donald Trump has launched with massive economic dislocation and chaos and crises. We all know this. I mean, the stock market drops a huge bunch and then comes back up when he suspends his tariffs against 70 countries, and he can't get his story straight. He says, oh, well, tariffs are great. And then he says, these 70 countries are coming and bowing before me and they want to make a deal. Well, what's the deal? The deal necessarily involves a lowering of tariffs on both sides. Well, how is that a good thing if tariffs are a good thing? So there's this internally built contradiction here. But in the process of all this economic chaos, Trump is going on the war path against the head of the Federal Reserve, Powell. And he wants to replace him. And he's calling him too late. He's saying he's mismanaging the money supply. He's not lowering interest rates quickly enough. Well, the idea is that Trump knows that his tariffs and trade wars are causing massive chaos here in the markets, stock market, bond market. In fact, the bond market's the most interesting thing. I mean, when I see big bankers get nervous over something, I think that's worth something watching, because to me it reflects that things might be more precarious than they're letting on. And when the bond market started to get shaky with Trump's massive trade war and interest rates started going up on long-term bonds, the big bankers and the big hedge fund people and the people on Wall Street, you could tell they got nervous. And something was going on here. And from all accounts, they're the ones that pressured Trump into dropping his trade war for 90 days against all the countries except China. So what Trump wants is this artificial burst of prosperity that comes with lower interest rates, which is totally false and fraudulent when the Fed does this. They're artificially lowering interest rates. It looks like, oh my gosh, happy days are here again. But it's just a temporary type thing that ultimately you're going to have the recession, the shakeout, when everything manifests itself. That this was not genuine prosperity. It's just a fake type thing that the Federal Reserve has been doing ever since its inception. Is just debasing the currency and making it look like it's prosperity. Like, oh, happy days are here again. We saw this in the 1920s. Okay, right after the Fed was established. The roaring 20s. Remember, happy days are here again because the Fed was artificially lowering the interest rate, and they were still in the gold standard then, where gold money and gold coins and silver coins were the official money. I mean, that was the money set by the Constitution. And so then they panicked because people were starting to realize, there's a lot of paper notes out there, and they were starting to trade them in for their gold, and the Fed panicked and over-contracted, raising interest rates and so forth, and that's what brought the stock market crash. But everybody knows that in that initial period, in the 20s, and like quantitative easing and so forth, that those happy days are here again, but it's all fake and false. And so Powell is there resisting. He says, "Look, I'm here till 2026. This is the way this thing was set up. I'm independent of the executive branch, and we have to make our decisions in accordance with what is best." Now, they're central planners. They never do it. Central planning is bad news. It's a socialist construct. It always produces what Ludwig von Mises called planned chaos. And so, sure, they miss. I mean, Trump's right. They always miss in terms of how do you manage something as complex as money. But the notion that, getting rid of this guy and putting in some lackey that's going to immediately follow orders. I mean, at that point, Trump becomes the person setting the interest rates. And with the chaos that the tariffs are causing, and this is another thing that irked Trump, is that Powell went and gave a speech saying this. I forget where it was, Chicago or something, before some group, where he said, look, the tariffs are creating a situation, he used very diplomatic language, a situation that was unpredictable and so forth. But what he was really saying, in other words, was that we got some economic chaos here, and it has put the Fed into a box because we may be looking at a severe recession here, and yet the Fed is trying to fight inflation, the rising prices, by maintaining interest rates stable, not changing, not lowering them. And now they're in an awkward position because they may be looking at a very severe recession here, which ordinarily is when they lower the interest rates. So you may end up with what's called stagflation. So it's an absolute mess, but the mess is being caused in the short term here by this ridiculous trade war policy, tariffs. To me, it's absolutely amazing to see a Republican advocating higher taxes and saying that higher taxes are going to bring us prosperity. It's amazing. And the Trumpsters are right there on the same page. It is so fascinating to see Trumpsters just following Donald Trump blindly. Oh yes, taxes, what? And then Trump says, and the taxes are generating revenues for the federal government. And that's a good thing? I mean, that means they're plundering and looting and sucking money out of people's pockets to give it to the federal government. So it's a sales tax. And great, more taxes. It reminds me of a slave on the 19th century plantation, beat me some more. It feels so good. Raise my taxes more, President Trump, raise my taxes. Oh, happy days are here. I mean, imagine if the Democrats, if Harris had gotten in and she said, with an executive order, I hereby increase income taxes across the board 20%. I mean, one would hope that the Republicans would object, but who knows? I mean, they're now gone into this that taxes are good and taxes bring prosperity, so maybe they would have cheered Harris and said this is a wonderful thing to raise income taxes by 20%. Anyway, let's go on to immigration. A lot going on in immigration. this guy and this immigrant from El Salvador who was here in the United States, named Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia. Okay, so he's still there. The Trump administration sent him down. They acknowledged in federal court that it was an administrative error. They should never have done that. The guy was protected with immigration orders or court orders or whatever, but there was no doubt he shouldn't have been sent down there. Now, interesting enough, when the assistant U.S. attorney from the Justice Department was acknowledging this before the federal judge, I mean, that's the job of a lawyer. I mean, a lawyer is not permitted to lie to a federal judge. He tells the truth on both sides, prosecutor and defense. It's not a good idea to lie to a judge. Our judicial system is based on truth. And so the lawyer told the truth, and he got fired for it. or suspended. I'm not sure, one or the other. He got reprimanded and taken off duty. I'm not sure what was permanent or temporary, because he was supposed to blindly say, oh, no, he belongs down there, which is the official line. But I got to commend the senator from Maryland, Chris Van Hollen. Now, this was an impressive piece of work. I mean, this guy goes down to El Salvador to meet with this guy. And the reason it so impresses me is it shows a lot of courage, or maybe stupidity, depending on your perspective. But I think it's courage that he went down there, because there was no telling what could happen to him. I mean, that guy down there, Bukele, the president, could have easily put him in that CCOT prison. And there's nothing anybody could have done about it. There's federal judges couldn't do anything about it here. The judiciary over there, the federal judiciary, they're not going to stand up to Bukele. They're not independent, and they're as scared of him as everybody else in the country. He calls himself a dictator. I mean, he himself calls himself a dictator. And so when Van Hollen went down there, he was really taking his life and liberty in his own hands, or putting him in Bukele's hands. Because if Bukele had chosen to jail him, there's nothing anybody could do. And President Trump, maybe President Trump would have done something. I'm not sure. I'm not convinced of that. I mean, because President Trump is certainly not asking Bukele to send the other guy back, even though he's under federal court order to facilitate the return of this guy, of this immigrant, and Obregon Garcia. And Trump isn't doing that. He's not following that federal court order, clearly. And so there's a lot of litigation taking place around that, with Judge Boasberg in D.C., and there's another judge in Maryland that's dealing with the issue, and there's depositions. Boasberg is threatening contempt, criminal contempt, which is really rare. I mean, usually you have civil contempt, but a criminal contempt, you're talking about a criminal conviction here. Now, most of the time it's a misdemeanor, but sometimes it's a felony as well. So things are getting pretty serious with respect to this confrontation between Trump and the judicial branch, executive branch. And as I've said before, if it gets to the point where the Trump administration is saying, I'm not going to comply with your orders, we are now formally in the land of dictatorship. At that point, the judiciary will be rendered impotent. I mean, our system of government is 3 branches. There's actually 4 now with the national security establishment. They're the most powerful branch, and I think the branch that's really ultimately in control. But there's always this notion that there would be checks and balances, and from the very beginning, in the case of Marbury versus Madison, that established that the judiciary decides what is constitutional or not. Now, all 3 branches can make that determination, but the final arbiter is the judicial branch. And if it gets to the point where Trump says, that's no longer the case, I will decide what I can do, what I can't do, we're formally, when that line is crossed, in the land of dictatorship. And we know that the government, Trump wields omnipotent powers. Ever since 9/11, those powers have been now publicly manifested. They existed before 9/11, but they become publicly manifested in terms of, I mean, did you ever think as a kid, okay, ask yourself this question. When you were a kid growing up and you heard about the Soviet Union and North Korea and communist Cuba and so forth, did you ever think that you would be living in a country where the government has the power to assassinate people, including the citizenry? Because that's the kind of government we live under now. I mean, when Trump was in president the first time, he ordered the assassination of that Iranian general, which the United States isn't at war with Iran. I mean, this was just an assassination of a guy. And, but it shows he has that power. Nothing happened to him, okay? He's not impeached. He's not indicted. Nothing happens to a president that orders an assassination, and nothing happens to the assassins. I don't know who the people were that actually fired the missile that killed this guy, but they're not going to be indicted. They weren't indicted for murder. And that's what happened after the U.S. was converted to a national security state. I mean, if you look at the Bill of Rights, it specifically says no killing of anybody without due process of law. And due process means notice and hearing. And I mean, that's the whole idea of this Obregón Garcia guy, that they denied him due process of law. This is a fundamental procedural protection that goes back to Magna Carta in the 13th century. And so that will not happen, the Bill of Rights says. But it did happen when Trump ordered the assassination of this Iranian general, because the Bill of Rights applies to all people, not just Americans. But the fact is they also have the power to assassinate Americans. And that's been established. They have assassinated Americans, okay? That was Anwar al-Awlaki. That was the precedent. And they always pick somebody that's unpopular. And, of course, one of the most unpopular is the terrorist. In fact, it was really interesting when I was looking at a picture of the front of this penitentiary that this guy Bukele has established in El Salvador. It has something about terrorism. I mean, this is what every dictator uses, is the war on terrorism, because they know that this justifies their use of dictatorial powers. It's better than the war on communism. You look at any dictatorial regime in the world, and they will talk about, we're stopping terrorism. It's always terrorism. And so here in the United States, everybody's a terrorist now, whoever they want to get. The immigrants have now been turned into terrorists. Every time they got an immigrant, like, this guy, they're calling him a terrorist. Okay? And you got gangs, foreign gangs, like neighborhood gangs, terrorists. Okay? Because when you've got this mindset post 9/11 of terrorism, everybody says, okay, anything goes. And that's how we really lost much of our liberty. We'd already lost a lot of it with the drug war and the welfare state and the warfare state, but the war on communism, the Cold War, the conversion to a national security state. But this, when they declared the war on terrorism, this was their dream come true, because there's always terrorists in the world. So it's a perpetual war. Terrorists everywhere, all over the world. Global war on terrorism, and you can wage it anytime you want. So why are they doing this with this El Salvador thing? Well, it's clear they're doing it for deterrence. That they don't want immigrants to come to the United States anymore. These are vermin. These are bad people, and so the message is, if you come up here, this is where you're going to end up. And so it's sort of like when they were separating children from their parents in the first Trump administration. The idea is, if you don't want your children taken away from you, you better not come with your family. Okay, this is what will happen to you. And now this is the message you're sending out. You don't want this to happen to you. But the irony in this is that it also applies to Americans. This is like a lot of Americans that are cheering this. That isn't it wonderful that boy, Trump has made this deal with this dictator in El Salvador to take our immigrants down there and jail them when they haven't even been convicted of a crime. I mean, they're in this horrific place with the most violent of people, and there's torture. They torture them in this place, and the U.S. tortures people too. But I mean, these people have not been convicted of a crime, but they're terrorists. You see, they're terrorists. As long as the government labels them a terrorist, and that's what this guy Bukele does. He does the same thing U.S. presidents do. Whoever they're torturing or incarcerating is a terrorist. Okay, and that's why the sign of that thing, the war on terrorism or something like that. But it is working. I mean, there's no question about the fact. I mean, I've often said that it is, I think, theoretically possible to seal the border like North Korea does. I mean, you don't see very many people getting into North Korea uh, because they've sealed the border. But by the same token, not very many people want to get into North Korea. So it's difficult to know whether people are no longer coming here in large numbers because they find this a very unattractive country. I mean, there's a lot of Americans leaving. I mean, 1 million Americans living in Mexico, which is ironic because this is the land of rapists and murderers and everything that are trying to get into the United States. And here you got 1 million Americans living down there on that half of the border, on the other side of the border. And it's like, maybe, I wonder if the government ever thinks about, well, maybe we should order them back. But there's people going to Spain and France. I've noticed more and more Americans are moving overseas, which is kind of a interesting phenomenon. So, in any event, there's now people that are self-deporting, and it's really a sad situation. I read an article about this. I forget where I read it, but that people have been here like 20 years, and they're starting to leave. They're packing up their belongings, and why? They said, well, because we want to go back on our terms, with our belongings, our savings, and so forth, instead of being picked up on the street by, plainclothesmen or something, kidnapped essentially, and then whisked away to this penitentiary in El Salvador. So it really is working. They're scaring the death out of people. When you see a country where there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of fear in this country, principally among immigrants, but I also read a story with a woman, a member of Congress. I forget who it was, but she says there's a lot of people who are afraid in this country of what's going on. But anyway, they're self-deporting, and I was thinking of in U.S. history, it's not the first time this has happened, that during the Great Depression, they had what's called the Great Repatriation, where they said that scapegoats, people always look for scapegoats. In Germany, the scapegoats were the Jews, but over here in the 30s, the scapegoats were Mexican immigrants. So Hoover and Roosevelt both said, we don't want you here. You're taking jobs away from Americans. Remember, this was the Great Depression, which ironically had been caused by the Federal Reserve. A lot of Americans don't realize that because they don't teach that in the public government schools. But that's a fact. The same Federal Reserve we were talking about earlier is what produced the stock market crash in 1929. And so when there's massive unemployment in the Great Depression as a result of these antics by the Federal Reserve, they look for scapegoats, and they say, oh, well, Mexicans are taking away jobs from the Americans. And so they forced them out. They had violent raids, like a lot in Los Angeles, where they would surround a park, and then they'd start asking for identification. And if Mexicans there couldn't show identification, they were scooped up and sent home. And so to avoid this, a lot of Mexicans said, we're going to go home. And you can go online and Google Great Repatriation, and you can see the pictures, Google images of people. I mean, it's horrible, horrifying thing, the sadness. People at the train station saying goodbye to their friends and family members. A lot of the kids stayed here that had been born here, American citizens, and their parents wanted them to have a better life, so they went back to Mexico and left their kids here. And it was all just scapegoating. Ironically, that in Germany, they were scapegoating the Jews. Because you always need scapegoats, okay? You never want to accept responsibility when you're in the government for what you've done, like the Federal Reserve causing the Depression. And in fact, they used immigration controls, the same controls we have today, when Hitler in the 30s offered to let German Jews leave Germany. This was before the Holocaust. The Holocaust didn't get going till World War II. This was all during the 30s. And Hitler said, okay, I'm willing to let go of the Jews. They're the cause of Germany's woes, much like, the immigrants are the cause of America's woes. And so, but the U.S. said, no. We have, Roosevelt said, we have the quota system, and our quota for German immigrants is already filled. There's nothing we can do here. And so they used the immigration system to keep German Jews from coming to the United States, and that was the attitude all over the world. I mean, anti-Semitism was not limited to Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. It pervaded everybody all over the world. And so that was America's contribution to the Holocaust. It was an indirect contribution, but all those German Jews that could have come to the United States, but weren't permitted to, remained in Germany, or at least most of them did, and they ended up losing their lives. So you see your situation here in the United States where things are very bad. I mean, people like to think, oh, this is a great society, Jacob. Well, there's a lot of people that don't think it's a great society. For example, you take all those young people that are committing suicide, they obviously don't think it's a great society. And, that to me is one of the greatest signs that this is a sick society. This is a sick society. When you see young people checking out early, when you're young, you got the whole rest of your life, and man, to look forward to and all. This is a time of great hope and joy and stuff. You haven't been battered down by life and stuff as you do as you reach your 40s and 50s and 60s. But no, they're checking out early. And that to me is your perfect sign. But you have also other signs. You got mass killings. You just had another one in Florida. And to me, it's the whole system that was brought into existence in the 20th century is just a failed system. It's a destructive system. The immigration control system, which was really brought into existence in the late 1800s, but it was part of this statist trend that manifests itself principally in the 20th century, the advent of the welfare state, taking money from one group of people and giving it to another group of people through the IRS, through force, and calling it good, caring, and compassion. The biggest one was the conversion to a national security state with omnipotent powers, assassination, torture, indefinite detention. The drug war, which has been a massive violation of civil liberties and privacy. And this whole thing is cracking. The banking system, the abandonment of the gold coin, silver coin standard without even a constitutional amendment. And everything's precarious, I think. I think the banking industry might be very precarious. I think that's why those bankers might get really, really nervous over this trade war. And what's going on, all the finagling that's going on, trying to figure out how to make it work and so forth. And then seeing this bond crisis take place. And I think that what's happening here is that people are looking for scapegoats, as they have throughout history. Americans are. And so they say it's the immigrants that are here illegally. And many of the immigrants also that are here legally that they're getting rid of. That if we can just get rid of immigrants, our welfare, warfare state, drug war, war on immigrants, the whole thing, our whole status system will work. Paper money, Federal Reserve, this is pure nonsense. Because the immigrants are not the cause of the problem. Okay, in fact, if anything, immigrants bring vitality and prosperity to a society. They're like a free gift to a society. They bring energy, entrepreneurship. But by targeting the scapegoat, the idea is President Trump will be the one to make this system work, this statist system that we call freedom. Okay, thank God I'm an American, because at least I know I'm free. And thank you, sir, for your service. Thank you, Mr. Soldier, for your service invading Iraq and Afghanistan. That was just a tremendous thing for you to do. And you kept our freedoms here. And the war on terrorism is, the system is a bad system. And they're just scapegoating it, thinking that if they just can get rid of the immigrants, it'll work. It won't work. It's just scapegoating and the needless infliction of suffering and abuse on innocent people. That's this week's Trump Watch. Look forward to talking to y'all next week.